Jurors on Thursday night found a fired Oklahoma City police officer guilty of sexual offenses involving 8 victims and chose punishments that could mean he will never go free. The Oklahoman's Kyle Schwab and Nolan Clay report that Daniel Holtzclaw was charged with 36 counts that accused him of sexually assaulting 13 black females. It happened between December 2013 and June 2014 while a police officer. Holtzclaw was fired in January. He was convicted Thursday of 18 of those 36 counts, including 4 counts of first-degree rape. Jurors chose punishments ranging from 5 to 30 years, and the prosecutors plan to ask District Judge Timothy Henderson to force Holtzclaw to serve the prison time consecutively, meaning a total of 263 years. The verdicts came on Holtzclaw's 29th birthday and after jurors had deliberated for 45 hours over 4 days. Formal sentencing is now set for January 21st. We've seen a verdict, a recommended sentencing, and now it's time for a conversation. Joining us here in the Oklahoman's video studio from the Oklahoma City Police Department, Chief Bill Citty. Thank you for joining us. We have Grace Franklin, Oklahoma City, Artist for Oklahoma City. Am I saying that correctly?
Artist for Justice.
Artist for Oklahoma City, Artist for Justice.
Yes.
Grace Franklin, it's very nice to meet you and thank you for coming in. We heard you speak just earlier this morning. And Reverend Jesse Jackson from the East
6th Street Christian Church.
Thank you, sir. Very
Yes,
nice to see you again.
Yes, sir.
Everybody, thank you for coming in. Chief, I'll start with you and ask each of you your biggest takeaway from the verdict last night.
Well, I mean, I hope one of the biggest takeaways is that the system does work. Now, it may not always work to the extent that a lot would like. We've liked more verdicts with that many victims, because there were about 18 different allegations or charges that where they did not find him guilty on, which doesn't mean necessarily that he's not guilty. It means that they didn't have enough evidence to feel like they could find him guilty. So, but I hope everybody feels like, because I feel like that it does work. Obviously, I'd have been very disappointed if we hadn't had any guilty. And I think on some of the serious charges, is the first-degree rapes, that it's pretty satisfying to get the guilty charges against Holtzclaw on that. So I hope they take away that the system does work, that everybody worked hard for the victims, because the victims obviously, if they didn't have the courage to take the stand, we wouldn't be here. And you have to be very proud of them. It's a really bad time for us in law enforcement, and obviously it's a worse time for the victims.
Grace, we heard some of the victims speak this morning. There was a speech held just outside the courthouse. You were among those who spoke. I'll ask you your biggest takeaway from the verdict, and also 18 of 36 charges.
My biggest takeaway is that we can have an all-white jury that comes back with 18 counts. There was a huge concern in the African-American community about a jury being able to really see the evidence and look past some of the things that the defense was presenting about the women. That is a huge step forward. As a advocate for women, sexual assault and rape trials are always very difficult for the victims. The questions are always about character, questions about virtue, things of that nature. And these women did a spectacular job testifying in the face of very aggressive cross-examination. And I'm also optimistic about the relationship in our community with the police department, that it can continue to move forward, because the police department was so aggressive in moving forward in the investigation. So there are some bright spots. We are not pleased with the 5 women who didn't get justice, the other counts that were not guilty. We wanted 36 counts of guilty. And we know that in the investigation, the investigators all believed the survivors. We know that. But for whatever happened, it didn't translate in the jury. And that is a little concerning. But with 18 counts and over 200 years, we are excited that justice was served, because that's a life sentence. And as long as, and I don't think the judge will go against the jury's recommendation, as long as he ends up with those 200 and that's a life sentence, then that is progress. That is progress for Black women. That is progress for all women in rape and sexual assault cases.
Reverend, your biggest takeaway from the verdict last night?
Well, again, to kind of echo what Chief has said and to echo what Sister Grace has said, I think it's the beginning of justice. I was pleased with the 18 of 36, as Grace said. I believed all of the survivors, and I won't really feel like justice has been really completed until after the sentencing portion of this. You just want to kind of hold your breath and to make sure that the second part of this, which is a very important part, is taking place as well. Because if you get it all running concurrently, then you'll be eligible for parole after serving I think 85% or something of that nature. And so we want to make sure that justice is completed. However, I am happy with the fact that so many in the community came together to work together to stand in the gap for these ladies that were victimized and already marginalized. And so when I kind of got into it, into this case, we reached out to Grace and reached out to the members of OKC Artists for Justice to see what we could do to assist, because there was a lag in participation in the community, and some of it I think had to do with people just not feeling comfortable jumping on board. But as a pastor, as a Christian, I don't think we get to just choose whom we're going to show mercy to and what we're going to do. And so if we couldn't stand in the gap for the least of these ladies, then I think we need to just pack up, what we're doing. It was that important to me, and I wanted to make sure that we stood alongside of everybody that was working to see what we could do to make sure we had as much support down there as possible.
Grace, why Artists for Justice?
Why the name or why the
group?
Why the
Because
group?
you started this
Yes,
back in October.
right.
correct?
I'm a co-founder of the group, myself and Candace Liger. I am from the east side of Oklahoma City, so I was born and raised. I have a mother who still lives there, sisters who still live there, and I love my side of town. It's a place where children are raised and people grow old and own houses, and we're not just one thing. What most shocked me was the lack of concern for these women. And sometimes as women, if you don't present yourself a certain way, if you don't speak, if you're not articulate, if you have something on your record, you can sometimes be marginalized. And we wanted these women to know that they are as important as anybody else in our community, that the most vulnerable in the community have to be the most protected, because they're not able sometimes to verbalize or feel comfortable coming forward. So we wanted to be voices for these women, and we wanted people to stand up and say, hey, this is wrong. Whether you're a black or white or Hispanic, wrong is wrong. And we just wanted to make sure that their voices were heard.
On the topic of police handling of black women, what are some of the biggest areas of improvement that can be made, and how do we accomplish this?
Go ahead. No, you
Well, I think that Chief City began something a couple of weeks ago. I saw an advertisement trying to get more women, and particularly more women of color, I think, to become officers. And that is so important in terms of even when you're arresting women, having a female officer present and different things like that. And so I think that kind of diversity helps in terms of communication. It helps in terms of being a buffer against some things that could possibly happen. So I applaud Chief for that.
I would agree, diversity is the biggest issue. We have to have more women on the force and more women of color, because that can help handle situations a little differently. It's just like having more people of color on the force, period. There are some cultural things that happen between people, and as a woman, I feel more comfortable with a female officer if I needed to be patted down or if I needed to be touched in any way. Not because I believe all officers are trying to do something to me, it's just that I'm female, I'm a woman, it's just more comfortable. And aggressiveness can sometimes occur when a woman is uncomfortable. We become more standoffish. We don't want to be handled.
Sure.
Yeah, we don't want to be handled. So sometimes situations that can be diffused kind of escalate. And I think sometimes with a female officer, it's helpful to have that voice there, that female voice there to say, hey, we're going to pat you down, but nothing's going to happen. It's okay. It's okay. We just need to do this. So I think that's a great way to combat that, is to have more female officers.
Chief?
I wouldn't disagree with the Reverend or Grace on anything that they've said. And that's one of the reasons for the campaign, because we only have about 10% right now of women in our as police officers, and they bring a great deal to the table, just as minorities do. That being said, it's things like that are going on nationally. It's things like that's happened in relationship to this. We have an officer that does something like this. It helps build distrust within the minority community, and we work constantly in trying, and it's a constant battle and constant work on our side and the community side to build that trust further. So that in itself makes it difficult to recruit and hire minorities. So there's a lot of issues here, and it's something that the communication between the community and the police department and all of us working together to try to make it better and I think we do that here. I think I'm pretty proud of it. I'm pretty proud of, actually, I want to say this, when Grace started the organization, it was new. I didn't know what it was, and we had a chance to meet, and the thing about sexual assaults is, in many cases with law enforcement, we can reach out to the victims. We have a victims program. We can reach out to them, but in many cases like this, they still don't trust that the entity from the police department itself. Whether it's justified or not, it's just reality. So the community coming together to support the victims, is huge. And you wouldn't have this case today if those victims weren't supported and came forward to testify. It probably would not have happened.
We've seen around the country unrest when against the police turning violent at times. What made Oklahoma City different in this regard?
I could, on behalf of the police department, we just haven't seen that in this community. I think there's been good communication over the years. Everybody's tried to work to try to understand and make sure that we are trying to do what's right and what's best for the minority communities. I always go all the way back to Clara Looper. When she was at the Cats,
The drugstore.
The drugstore in the sit-in, and where the police department worked with that movement to make sure the protests were peaceful, because we've always supported the right to protest, and to make actually the arrest. Clara Looper wanted to be arrested and coordinated the arrest so that the points could be made without having that civil discourse. And so I think it's been kind of a practice, and it's kind of been, historically we've been that way, that people have worked together. That's not to say that couldn't change, but we all need to work together to make sure it doesn't happen.
Grace, you stated your opinion about a lack of support from the church in your community. What are your concerns?
Well, one of the things in the African American community is that the largest and most powerful organization is the Christian church, is the church, black church. And we felt like there wasn't enough presence in public out there with us, out there standing up for these women, when we know that the majority of congregations are black women. So we did have some concern, and we were just wondering, why wasn't this as important as other things? So it was a concern, and it was a heartbreaking concern, because we didn't want to come at it as attacking the church. We don't want to attack the church, but we do want to say, hey, we needed you out here with us. We needed you to be more vocal. I know there were things that were happening behind the scenes, but we needed you to stand with us while we were out there, because we are in the church, and we'll always be in the church, but we need to feel loved and protected as well, and we just didn't feel that publicly. So that was our concern, and like I said, I always try to be very delicate with that, because we don't want to condemn the whole East Side church community, but at the same time, we felt a little abandoned and didn't feel the same support that we think we would feel in a different situation. So we just, we had a few issues with that.
Reverend, your thoughts?
Yeah, I was with her. I was with her on that, and that was one of the reasons that we reached out to her, because again, I think it was our responsibility, and there was some lag time in certain establishments getting behind this case. And this was sitting in the courtroom and listening to where some of these attacks happen. This is my home. these are streets that I've driven down 1,000 times.
You can visualize that area.
It became extremely personal to me as someone who has a wife and a daughter, now a granddaughter. My goodness, you know, why wouldn't you do that? And I called out some of my colleagues in social media and said to them, you cannot pastor black women on Sunday and then not stand in the gap for them Monday through Saturday. It's disingenuous, it's bogus, and it's cowardly. And you had to get in there and help. And because OKC Artists for Justice had already established relationships with many of those survivors and their families, to come alongside of them and support them and not come in and say, okay, y'all done your job now, so we got it now. You know, it's not that kind of party. And a delicate nature of sexual assault, the last thing I thought they needed was for a male face to be right there, now trying to, you know, do that. So that's why we wanted to make sure, if anything, we kind of shielded Sister Grace and Candace and the other members of OKC Artists for Justice and said, okay, we want y'all to do that. We're going to assist, and we're going to kind of really hold everybody else at bay so you all can do the work that you're doing. But I want you to let the sisters know that we're standing. And so that was what we wanted to do.
I mentioned that there was a press conference this morning on the south side of the courthouse. Some of the victims addressed the media, bravely coming forward. Chief, this question comes to you. One of the questions that family members had was, how does a cop have the access to turn off the GPS, to act in a rogue manner? How does this go for as long as they did without detection, without some of the colleagues noticing?
Well, first off, the GPS system was not turned off on all the victims except one, and that was, and she identified herself, Jamie Liggins, the last one that brought it forward. The GPS was not on at that point. He was off duty. He was on his way home, and he stopped her when he was off duty. She was the only one that was actually stopped off duty. All the others were on duty. His GPS was on. In fact, the GPS was how we actually corroborated.
That was part of the evidence.
Part of the evidence, because we could show that each victim was truthful by where they said they were taken, and combined with GPS that proved they were telling the truth, that GPS moved to those locations. So the GPS actually did work. It was very, very beneficial in this case. It's, you know, the case itself, I mean, any sex offense case in many ways is very, very difficult. But it was obvious that the jurors took more into consideration than just the GPS, because we had GPS on almost all the victims. We could identify that. So what the victims had to say and what they felt the evidence was beyond the GPS was obviously important to the jury also.
One last question for everybody. As a community, what's next? How do we move forward?
Well, one of the things that we're going to do, we're going to meet Thursday at Occupy the Corners OKC. We're going to meet at East 6th Street Christian Church. There were several cases, there were several things that arose in this case. We wanted to keep the ladies first and foremost, but there were several systemic issues that we wanted to try to deal with in the aftermath of this. And so now that this verdict has come down, we're now able to deal with some of the systemic issues, and we'll start talking about that and plotting a game plan on Thursday at 6 o'clock at the church. Yeah.
Very good. And Grace, you have an event coming up as well?
Yes, we have a forum on the 15th of December at Langston University, OKC, 6 p.m. And on that panel, we're going to discuss sexual assault and rape, ways that the community can protect women. We're going to talk about ways to interact with the police department. If you have something you want to report, maybe you don't feel comfortable, we have different avenues, and we want to give people information to get themselves healthy, to report, and also to discuss some issues with the police department, the best way to interact, how can we be safe if we interact, and also the importance of getting women in the police force. So if you have a daughter or a granddaughter who's interested, some ways that we can get some more faces in there that look like ours, because we have to actually apply to get in to the police department. So, and talk about why that's important. So we just want to talk about how to move forward in the community and keep the lines of communication open, and also educate ourselves about sexual assault and rape.
Chief, I'll give you the final word. Anything you would like to say to the community at this point?
Well, I mean, I'd like to say that, first off, I'm very proud of this community and their willingness to let the process work, the trust to allow the process to work, the support. I have to say, you know, the detectives haven't been mentioned much, but I am very, very proud of our employees and detectives that were very, very proactive and went out and really searched and hunted for the victims, additional victims themselves that really were reluctant to come forward for a variety of reasons. And they worked very hard at doing that. It's been tough for everybody. I think moving forward and having the forums and having the discussions and listening to what the community's concerns are very important for the police department. It's very important for us to listen and to look at ourselves and in the future always look at making changes to better serve that public and build that trust.
Chief Bill Citty with the Oklahoma City Police Department, Grace Franklin, Reverend Jesse Jackson, thanks for your time today. Much appreciated.
Thank you.